To ensure we are being mindful of everyone in beloved community, we want to let you know the following orations may contain triggering content for people who have endured sexual or domestic violence. Please prioritize your personal health by opting out of this video if needed at this time.
We are survivors of sexual violence. We are family members and loved ones of people who have experienced sexual and domestic violence. We are community-based advocates, attorneys, civil rights advocates, clinicians, healthcare providers, and social workers. Collectively, we have decades of experience working to eradicate gender-based violence and provide for immediate and long-term needs of people who have experienced sexual and domestic violence.
It is because of this collective knowledge and experience that we stand in firm opposition to legislation that places additional burdens on people who have experienced sexual and domestic violence to offer proof or verification that a sexual assault occurred in order to obtain an abortion after 6 weeks.
In order to access abortion care after 6 weeks, Senate Bill 1183 would require those seeking an exemption on the basis of rape or incest to report the incident to law enforcement and then provide a copy of the report to a physician who will provide the abortion. It is incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for a person who has experienced sexual and domestic violence to obtain a report because police will not release reports during active investigations.
Not only that, applying for an exemption asks victims to undertake a burdensome process that can compound the trauma of being raped and becoming pregnant. The obligation to show proof of rape or incest places an unimaginable hardship on survivors, implicitly suggesting that the stories of those who have experienced sexual or domestic violence cannot be believed without verification from the state.
Mandatory reporting requirements fail to take into account that many people who have experienced intimate partner violence do not report their assault to law enforcement and may not wish to involve the criminal legal system. Many report feeling blamed, disgraced, defamed, or too ashamed to report their sexual victimization. Additionally, the offender may also influence the person who experienced violence and their decision on whether or not to file a police report.
The choice not to report may be due to a desire for privacy, concern for their children, or because they believe that calling the police will only make things worse or fear their abuser will not be held accountable. Others who have experienced sexual or domestic violence report that they are afraid to involve the criminal legal system because they don't think they'll be believed or they think their abuser will just get a slap on the wrist. These variables and others may all factor into a person's decision not to report.
Mandatory reporting requirements fail to acknowledge that many people who have experienced sexual or domestic violence, particularly those from communities of color, do not feel safe reporting to police. According to a study from the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs, transgender people of color were 6 times more likely to experience physical violence from the police compared to white cisgender survivors and victims.
The intersection of racism and transphobia can make people who have experienced sexual and domestic violence more vulnerable to violence and more likely to experience discrimination from those that are supposed to offer protection, direct service providers, and law enforcement.
We believe people who have experienced sexual and/or domestic violence. Full stop. Many of us reading this letter have experienced these types of violences and recognize this proposed legislation for what it is, a thinly veiled attempt at usurping our autonomy and the autonomy of our collective communities.
In sum, this legislation fails to acknowledge the realities that survivors of sexual violence experience. The amendment from the previous iteration of this bill, Senate Bill 1085, was deliberate and without any consultation with people who have experienced sexual or domestic violence or advocates against intimate partner violence. This lack of consultation shows a disregard for the lived experiences of those directly impacted.
For those who have experienced gender-based violence and their families. That means bringing people who have experienced sexual domestic violence and advocates against intimate partner violence to the policymaking table. We must ensure all healthcare, including abortions, remains accessible, regardless of whether a person chooses to report. Abortion is a healthcare, and healthcare is a human right. We are in solidarity with all those who have experienced sexual and domestic violence.